good to go.
My name's Buddy Pitman. I'm a forage agronomist. I work here at the Hill Farm Research Station and also do some forage work at the Red River Station over south of Bossier. I'm going to talk about clovers, and I've spent a career working with legumes, and I've learned a whole lot more about how not to grow legumes than how to grow them. So why am I spending all this time with legumes and having lots of negative results? And that's a valid question, because I can grow Bermuda grass and Bahia grass in the summer and ryegrass in the cool season in the late winter and spring, and if I manage to produce the forage I want, put enough fertilizer out there, manage the stocking rate like Lee was talking about, I can pretty dependably have forage of the grasses. And the legumes are a real problem. But Lee mentioned to you when he was talking a while ago about the surprising price of nitrogen fertilizer. That's one of the reasons that we've talked about legumes for decades now, and we still can't tell you how to dependably make those work in most situations. What's right directly behind me is a plot of arrowleaf clover. This time last year, this was a solid stand. This is typical for arrowleaf clover. It's probably the most productive clover for our soils like the coastal plain soils. The first year you plant arrowleaf clover, it will cover things up. It's a late flowering clover. You can see there's no blooms on it. A couple of months ago, this was solid arrowleaf clover seedlings. So you need to have a little sense of what you're doing with the different clovers. Arrowleaf clover shows no symptoms to root disease. It has some viruses that you can see real clearly, and the forage breeding program at Overton, Ray Smith, developed some varieties resistant to the obvious disease, the leaf diseases that gave you red and purple leaf colors. But then after he overcame the leaf colors, the root diseases thinned out the stand. So my solid stand of seedlings a couple of months ago were thinned out because a large part of the arrowleaf clover population is susceptible to a root disease complex. So what I have left in the stand is the plants that are resistant to that disease. That tells us a little bit about what we could do with arrowleaf clover. We need to plant it in a different spot every year. And then you'd also want to get rid of the plants that come up in a partial stand so they won't keep the disease building up. Well, where would you use something like that? Well, if you're in a stocker operation, or you're depending on something to provide a transition from ryegrass to Bermuda grass, arrowleaf clover has a place. It's a high quality forage, it's productive, it grows later than most of our other clovers, so arrowleaf clover has a place in a production system based on using it. You would need to rotate the areas. Crop rotation's a big thing, but we don't think of pasture rotation, but you would need to rotate where you plant arrowleaf clover from year to year to keep the disease problem from thinning out the stand. If you look directly behind the arrowleaf clover, you recognize the crimson clover, and you see the problem with it. It's a flower bed now. The growth period is past. It's full flower. If you look on the traffic circle there right by the office buildings, that's a little different variety. It's an earlier variety, and it's already brown. It's already lost even its flower color. So crimson clover is a clover you would need to use early if you have a place for it. And where would that be? Well, one of the places, again with the price of nitrogen, if you can project that, and at planting time in the fall, you think through what you're trying to do, we can mix some crimson clover in with our ryegrass plantings and hope that it provides enough early growth to give us a little benefit of nitrogen so we can reduce that fertilizer application. That doesn't happen every year. Crimson clover can be managed for early growth when the weather's right. If the rains don't come in the fall when we plant it, we don't get it up quite as early as we need to, but that happens with the ryegrass too. But as you look at the possibilities, crimson clover is our best widely adapted on our coastal plain soils. So if we can figure out where to put it in to substitute for some nitrogen, give us some early forage in that late February, early March period, we can benefit from crimson clover in a mixture with our ryegrass. Planting it alone, it just has such a short period of production that it really wouldn't be generally useful for most cattle producers. If you look back over to your right, the white flower patch in the back is ball clover. We've had some real good success mixing ball clover and crimson clover, and as the ball clover is maturing and grazed down, the ball clover can come through, and even though it's flowering, it's not a determinate plant. So as you graze it, it will keep providing some forage on into the into May and sometimes early June if we keep getting some moisture. But usually it's primarily productive in May. So a combination of crimson clover, ball clover, in with your ryegrass can reduce that fertilizer demand and give you an extended forage production period. There are a lot of limitations to depending on the clovers because you have to be in the right spot, and you almost need to do a trial planting a lot of these to see what fits on your site. On these upland sites, we get good results in some locations and almost no stand in other locations when the weather. Am I fading out?
Well, let's see if it's any better.
Can anybody hear me? All right, so some of you can hear anyway. Get back where I was. I've had so many failures with the clovers, I hesitate to tell you that that's a good substitute when the fertilizer price gets high, but it's one of the few things we have, and where the clovers have really worked for me is in places where there's a history of poultry litter application, but not a current application. You know, like current application would give too much nitrogen in mixture with the ryegrass and really not be beneficial. But where you've built up the fertility level over several years, but aren't going to apply the litter in the current year, this clover combination, the clovers really benefit from the buildup of nutrients. So if we're in the right spot, we have some real potential on our upland sites. Now, some of you have cattle on bottomland sites, on the river bottoms, and we have a whole different situation there. There's some of those river bottom soils that have white clover, whether you want it or not. And it really, where I've worked at the Red River Station, I can't predict where it's going to be good. There's years when I have so much white clover, I need more cattle on it so the Bermuda grass can come through in late May and June. And there, even red clover, which is another productive clover that's adapted to those heavier sites, red clover, white clover, and berseem clover work real well. Berseem's just an annual, and it's a later growing plant. It's a little more difficult to manage, but there's a whole different set of options on the upland sites and the bottomland sites. Even on our hill lands, if you look back at the area along the little ditch there, if we manage a little bit, we can have white clover stands that will stay there for a period of years. But usually you have to build up a population, maybe plant 2 or 3 years in a row, and with the right varieties and the right management, where we have the nutrient buildup from the litter. On the lower parts of some of these pastures, white clover can be beneficial. Another aspect that I need to mention, when we think about cattle, and that's kind of what pastures are all about, but we're entering a new world, as y'all know, and I don't know what payments are available immediately, but there are a lot of changes coming with ag programs, not just government programs. There are, we know about wetland mitigation, and there are all kinds of proposed programs to pay you to produce flowering plants for pollinators. There are even programs talked about for enhancing habitat for a variety of things. Now I know a lot of y'all work on habitat for probably white-tailed deer, maybe a few for turkey, but planting clovers in pastures over the next few years will probably provide some options for payments for pollinator habitat, just plant diversity habitat, habitat for a variety of species, some we don't even know that are there that you'll get paid to manage for. Those are things that you need to kind of be aware of, the conservation programs and the news. We have some opportunities in the near future to make money from some things that are not just cattle or hay. So that's something that's hard to predict and project, and it sounds strange, but it looks like those programs are really coming from the federal level and from some of the major industries wanting to invest their money in being sustainable and supporting regenerative agriculture and a lot of concepts that where you've produced pastures and you know they're stable and long term, you're going to have an opportunity to get paid to keep it that way, it looks like, as the politics seems to put our urban clients in a mood to be clients for more than just something to eat. Wink's going to talk a little bit more about some of these and correct some of what I've said. We're going to move up to this next set of plots and talk about a little bit more of that from a diversity and multiple species concept. Probably it would be best if you hold the questions till after Wink's talk, because he may answer most of your questions that I may have generated.